Sarah Martinez had always felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Growing up in the sprawling Victorian house on Maple Street, she watched her siblings, Michael, Rebecca, and David, share inside jokes, physical features, and a natural ease with their parents that she could never replicate. At family dinners, she sat at the corner of the mahogany table, listening to stories about relatives she'd never met and traditions that felt foreign to her heart. The truth came out on a rainy Tuesday evening when Sarah was 16. She'd been rummaging through her mother's jewelry box, looking for earrings to borrow, when her fingers found an envelope tucked behind the velvet lining. Her name was written across it in her mother's careful handwriting, but the document inside changed. Everything. Adoption certificate, it read. Sarah Elizabeth Martinez, formerly Sarah Rose Thompson. The paper trembled in her hands as the reality crashed over her. Every moment of feeling different, every sideways glance when people said she didn't look. Like her family, every instance of being treated as an afterthought, it all made horrible sense. When Sarah confronted her parents that night, the conversation was brief and cold. Her father, Richard Martinez, barely looked up from his newspaper. "We thought it was best not to tell you," he said, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone he used when discussing the weather. "You're part of this family now. That should be enough." Her mother, Eleanor, offered a weak smile that never reached her eyes. "We gave you a good home, Sarah. A name, opportunities. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word stuck in Sarah's throat like poison. She was supposed to be grateful for being treated like a charity case in her own home, for being reminded daily that she didn't belong. Michael, who was 3 years older and destined to inherit the family's successful real estate business, laughed when he overheard the conversation. "So that's why you're so weird," he said, not bothering to hide his smirk. "At least now we know you're not actually family." Rebecca and David, the twins who were 2 years younger than Sarah, joined in the cruel laughter. "No wonder, Mom, and Dad never really paid attention to you," Rebecca added with the casual cruelty that only teenagers could master. "You're not even a real Martinez." From that day forward, the family's treatment of Sarah shifted from indifferent to openly hostile. They made jokes about her adoption at dinner parties, introduced her to friends as our adopted daughter, with emphasis on the word adopted, and frequently reminded her how lucky she was that they'd taken her in. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was the systematic exclusion. Family meetings about the business happened without her. Holiday traditions were explained as family-only affairs. When relatives visited, Sarah was encouraged to give the family some space to catch up. Sarah learned to survive by becoming invisible. She threw herself into her studies, earning straight A's and scholarships that would eventually take her far away from Maple Street. She worked part-time jobs to save money, knowing she couldn't count on her adoptive family for financial support. Every small victory was hers alone, every setback faced without the safety net her siblings took for granted. "You know," Eleanor said one evening as Sarah packed for college, "we really did save you from a terrible life. Your birth mother was a teenage dropout. You could have ended up in foster care, bouncing from home to home. Instead, you got stability, education, and a chance at a real future." Sarah zipped her suitcase closed and looked at the woman who had raised her but never truly accepted her. "I'll remember that," she said quietly, though she was really thinking about all the ways she'd been made to feel like a burden rather than a blessing. As Sarah's taxi pulled away from the Victorian house, for the last time she didn't look back. She had no way of knowing that 18 years later she would return to that same house under circumstances none of them could have imagined, least of all the family who had spent so many years reminding her she didn't belong. College was Sarah's salvation. At State University, she wasn't the adopted daughter or the outsider. She was simply Sarah, a brilliant pre-law student with an infectious laugh and an unstoppable work ethic. For the first time in her life, she formed genuine friendships and discovered what it felt like to be valued for who she was, rather than tolerated for who she wasn't. She threw herself into her studies with the desperation of someone who knew education was her only path to freedom. While her roommates partied on weekends, Sarah worked at the campus library and studied in quiet corners, building the foundation for a future that would be entirely her own creation. During her sophomore year, she met Professor James Hartwell in constitutional law. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded Sarah of the grandfather she'd never had. Professor Hartwell quickly recognized Sarah's potential and became her mentor, guiding her through complex legal concepts and encouraging her to think beyond the limitations others had placed on her. "You have something special, Sarah," he told her after class one day. "A combination of analytical brilliance and emotional intelligence that will take you far in this profession. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of success." His words meant more to Sarah than he could have known. For years, her adoptive family had treated her achievements as flukes or strokes of luck. Professor Hartwell was the first person to suggest that her success was the result of genuine talent and hard work. Under his guidance, Sarah excelled in law school, graduating summa cum laude and earning a position at one of the city's most prestigious firms. She specialized in estate planning and family law, drawn to cases that involved complex family dynamics and inheritance disputes. Her colleagues joked that she had an uncanny ability to spot family dysfunction and navigate the emotional landmines that came with wealth and succession planning. What they didn't know was that Sarah's insights came from lived experience. She understood the pain of being excluded from family decisions, the humiliation of being treated as less than equal, and the way money and inheritance could be used as weapons to maintain power and control. As the years passed, Sarah built a life that was everything her adoptive family had told her she couldn't achieve. She purchased a beautiful downtown apartment, drove a luxury car she'd paid for herself, and earned a reputation as one of the city's most skilled estate attorneys. She dated occasionally but never seriously. The scars from her childhood had left her wary of depending on others or letting people too close. The only person from her past she maintained contact with was Professor Hartwell, who had become like a true father figure to her. They met for coffee every few months, discussing cases, legal theory, and life. He was the only person who knew the full story of her childhood and the pain she carried from those years of rejection. "You know," he said during one of their meetings, "success is the best revenge. You've built something remarkable with your life, Sarah. I hope you're proud of what you've accomplished." Sarah smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Professor Hartwell didn't miss. "Some days I feel like I'm still that 16-year-old girl finding out she doesn't belong anywhere. Success is wonderful, but it doesn't erase the hurt." "Perhaps not," he replied thoughtfully, "but it does give you the power to determine your own worth. You don't need their validation anymore, Sarah. You never did." Meanwhile, back on Maple Street, the Martinez family had maintained their comfortable lifestyle, built on the foundation of Richard's real estate empire. Michael had indeed inherited the business, though his management skills proved less impressive than his sense of entitlement. Rebecca had married well and lived a life of leisure, while David had struggled with addiction issues that the family preferred to ignore rather than address. Eleanor and Richard, now in their 70s, had grown increasingly isolated as their health declined. The children they had favored visited sporadically, usually when they needed money or wanted to discuss their future inheritance. The irony wasn't lost on the neighbors who remembered Sarah. The daughter they had dismissed was thriving, while the children they had cherished were proving to be disappointments in their own ways. None of them gave much thought to Sarah anymore. She had become a distant memory, a chapter in their family story that they preferred to forget. They had no idea that she was now earning more in a year than Michael's struggling business brought in, or that she had become one of the most respected estate attorneys in the state. They certainly had no idea that their paths were about to cross again in the most unexpected way possible. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November. Sarah was reviewing a complex trust document when her secretary knocked on her office door. "Ms. Martinez? There's a Mr. Hartwell on line 1. He says it's urgent." Sarah's heart skipped. Professor Hartwell rarely called during business hours and never described anything as urgent. She picked up the phone immediately. "James? What's wrong?" His voice was unusually serious. "Sarah, I need you to sit down. I have some news that's going to come as quite a shock." Sarah sank into her leather chair, gripping the phone tighter. "What is it?" "Your adoptive father, Richard Martinez, passed away 3 days ago. Heart attack. I saw the obituary in the paper, and there's something else, something important. His will is being read tomorrow, and according to the notice, you're named as a beneficiary." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Richard was dead. After 18 years of no contact, she was apparently mentioned in his will. It made no sense. That's impossible, she whispered. They made it clear I wasn't family. Why would he leave? Me, anything? I don't know, Professor Hartwell replied gently. But you need to be there for the reading. The law firm handling the estate is Pemberton and Associates. Do you know them? Sarah's mind was reeling. Pemberton and Associates was one of the oldest, most prestigious firms in the city. Whatever Richard had done, it was significant enough to warrant their involvement. Sarah? Professor Hartwell's voice brought her back to the present. Are you all right? I don't know, she admitted. I haven't spoken to any of them in almost 2 decades. I'm not sure I'm ready to see them again. You're not the same person you were when you left that house, he reminded her. You're successful, accomplished, and strong. You don't need their approval anymore. But you do deserve to know what Richard wanted to tell you. The next day, Sarah stood outside the imposing glass building that housed Pemberton and Associates, wearing her most professional suit like armor. She had spent the night alternating between anger and curiosity, unable to understand why Richard would include her in his will after years of treating her like an outsider. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, Sarah walked into the firm's elegant reception area and announced herself to the receptionist. Within minutes, she was escorted to a large conference room where the Martinez family was already assembled. The years had not been kind to any of them. Eleanor looked frail and bitter, her once proud posture now bent with age and disappointment. Michael had gained weight and lost most of his hair, his face showing the stress of running a business he wasn't qualified to manage. Rebecca, still trying to maintain her youthful appearance, looked plastic and desperate. David appeared thin and nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he fidgeted with his phone. When Sarah entered the room, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eleanor's lips pursed in disapproval. Michael's eyes narrowed with suspicion, and the twins exchanged glances that clearly communicated their displeasure at her presence. What is she doing here? Michael demanded, not bothering to greet Sarah or acknowledge that she had just lost the man who had raised her, however imperfectly. I was invited, Sarah replied calmly, taking a seat at the polished conference table. I'm as surprised as you are. Before anyone could respond, the door opened and a distinguished man in his 60s entered the room. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charles Pemberton, senior partner at this firm. I'll be handling the reading of Richard Martinez's last will and testament. He opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents. Before we begin, I want to note that Mr. Martinez updated his will quite recently, just 6 months ago, in fact. He was very specific about his wishes and insisted that all beneficiaries be present for this reading. Sarah felt every eye in the room boring into her. She kept her expression neutral, but inside, her heart was racing. What could Richard have possibly wanted to leave her? The will is quite detailed, Mr. Pemberton continued. But I'll summarize the key provisions. To Eleanor Martinez, his wife of 48 years, he leaves the family home and a monthly allowance sufficient to maintain her lifestyle for the remainder of her life. Eleanor nodded, as if this was exactly what she had expected. To his children, Michael, Rebecca, and David Martinez, he leaves equal shares in the family business, along with modest trust funds that will provide each of them with a comfortable annual income. The siblings relaxed visibly, satisfied that they were receiving what they considered their rightful inheritance. Mr. Pemberton paused and looked directly at Sarah. And to Sarah Martinez, his adopted daughter, he leaves the remainder of his estate, which includes his investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and personal assets, valued at approximately $12 million. The silence that followed was deafening. The explosion of outrage was immediate and deafening. That's impossible! Michael shouted, jumping to his feet so violently that his chair toppled backward. She's not even really family. There has to be a mistake. Rebecca's face had gone completely white. $12 million? That's more than the business and the house combined. This can't be legal. David just sat there, mouth hanging open, as if he couldn't process what he'd just heard. Eleanor's reaction was the most venomous. You little gold digger, she hissed at Sarah, her voice dripping with decades of suppressed hatred. You planned this somehow. You manipulated him. Sarah remained perfectly still, her legal training helping her maintain composure even as her world tilted on its axis. $12 million. Richard had left her $12 million, more money than she had ever imagined, and certainly more than she needed. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat authoritatively. If I may continue, there's more. He pulled out another document. Mr. Martinez also left a sealed letter specifically for Sarah, along with instructions that it be read aloud to the entire family. With trembling hands, Sarah accepted the envelope. Her name was written across it in Richard's familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully and unfolded the letter inside, her eyes scanning the contents before she read aloud. "My dear Sarah," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my family is probably very unhappy with my final decision. Let me explain. 40 years ago, I was a different man. Young, ambitious, and foolishly concerned with appearances and bloodlines. When Eleanor and I decided to adopt you, it wasn't out of pure altruism. We wanted to project an image of generosity and compassion to our community. We thought having an adopted child would make us look like better people. What we didn't expect was for you to be so remarkable. Your intelligence, your determination, your kindness despite how we treated you, these qualities shamed us. Instead of celebrating them, we felt threatened. Eleanor worried that people would notice how exceptional you were compared to our biological children. I worried that you would overshadow them, expose their mediocrity. So we did something unforgivable. We made you believe you weren't worthy of love or belonging. We treated you like a charity case instead of the gift you were. We pushed you away because your excellence made our failures more obvious. Over the past 18 years, I've watched from a distance as you built an extraordinary life. I know about your academic achievements, your successful career, your reputation as one of the finest attorneys in the state. I know because I've followed your career through newspaper articles, professional directories, and the occasional story from mutual acquaintances. Meanwhile, I've watched my biological children struggle with basic responsibility and maturity. Michael has nearly bankrupted the business I spent decades building. Rebecca has never worked a day in her life and treats her husband like a personal ATM. David has been in and out of rehabilitation programs, and none of them seem to take. I realize that the child we rejected became everything we hoped our biological children would be, while the children we favored became entitled, lazy, and disappointing. The irony is crushing. This inheritance is not a gift, Sarah. It's an acknowledgement of a debt we can never repay. You owe us nothing. You never did. You succeeded despite us, not because of us. You became an incredible woman in spite of our failures as parents. To Eleanor, Michael, Rebecca, and David, you have received exactly what you earned through your actions and choices. Sarah has received what she earned through hers. If this seems unfair to you, I suggest you consider how unfair we were to her for the first 18 years of her life. Sarah, I know this money cannot undo the hurt we caused you. I know it cannot replace the childhood you deserved or the family love we should have given freely. But perhaps it can serve as proof that your worth was never in question. Our ability to recognize it was. Live well, my dear daughter. You already have. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah folded the letter carefully, her hands remarkably steady considering the emotional earthquake that had just occurred. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. 40 years of marriage, and he calls you his dear daughter. He never called any of us that. Michael's face was purple with rage. This is insane! We'll contest the will. No judge will let this stand. Mr. Pemberton calmly retrieved another document from his portfolio. I anticipated that response, Mr. Martinez. Your father also left detailed instructions regarding any potential legal challenges to his will. He retained our firm specifically because of our expertise in creating ironclad estate documents. This will has been reviewed by 3 separate legal teams and includes specific provisions to discourage frivolous lawsuits. He paused and looked directly at Michael. Furthermore, Mr. Martinez included a clause stating that any beneficiary who challenges the will automatically forfeits their inheritance entirely, with their portion being donated to charity. I would strongly advise against any legal action. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying a quiet authority that filled the room. "I need some time to process this," she said, standing gracefully. "Mr. Pemberton, I'll be in touch with your office within the week to discuss the details." As she moved toward the door, Eleanor's voice stopped her. "Sarah, wait." The older woman's tone was different now, smaller, almost pleading. I know I wasn't the mother you deserved. Richard was right about that. Maybe we could—" "No," Sarah said firmly but not unkindly. "For 18 years you made sure I knew I wasn't really part of this family. You don't get to change that now because the circumstances have changed. You made your choices. I've made mine." Michael stepped forward, his voice desperate. "Sarah, be reasonable. That money should stay in the family, the real family. We could work out some kind of arrangement?" Sarah turned to face him fully, and for the first time since entering the room, she smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, but it was absolutely final. "Michael, I've been a real attorney for 15 years. I've earned every dollar in my bank account through my own work and talent. This inheritance doesn't change who I am, but it does prove something important." She paused, letting her words sink in. "It proves that even Richard in the end understood what you never could. That family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and belonging. And you lost the right to call me family a long time ago." With that, Sarah walked out of the conference room, leaving behind the people who had shaped her childhood but would have no place in her future. As the elevator doors closed, she heard shouting from the conference room, but the sound grew fainter with each floor she descended. Outside, the sigh, autumn air was crisp and clean. Sarah stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the reality of the last hour wash over her. She was now worth more than $12 million, but more importantly, she had finally received the validation she had never known she needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Hartwell. "How did it go?" Sarah typed back. "Better than I ever could have imagined. I'll call you tonight." As she walked toward her car, Sarah realized that Richard's final gift wasn't really the money. It was the acknowledgement that she had been worthy all along. The family who had spent so many years convincing her she didn't belong had finally admitted the truth. She had always been the best of them. The little girl who had been made to feel grateful for scraps had grown into a woman who could afford to be generous with her success. The child who had been excluded from family meetings was now in a position to make decisions that would affect multiple generations. And the daughter who had been laughed at for being adopted had gotten the last laugh after all. 3 months later, Sarah established the Martinez Foundation for Adopted Children, dedicated to providing scholarships and support services for kids aging out of the foster care system. She kept enough of Richard's inheritance to secure her own future, but devoted the majority to ensuring that other children wouldn't face the struggles she had endured. On the foundation's letterhead, she included a simple motto: "Every child belongs somewhere." It was a truth she had learned the hard way, but one she was determined to share with the world.